I mean, when you talk about Tiger Woods, he's very comparable to like that to Michael Jordan in the '90s, especially for kids growing up watching, for sports fans.
So he's one of the reasons I started to play golf.
Yeah, I mean, you think of Michael Jordan, like the first thing that pops into
It's the Turbo and 2K show.
my head is the Logo Man. I mean, he made that Logo Man. That was cool, and you see that today still on these on every single jersey and every sport that you're watching. Sure. You see the Logo Man on there. It's like the Nike. It's like the Under Armour. It's it's the biggest brand in all of sports. I mean, and Tiger Woods in golf, that's what he was in golf, and he's what made golf so popular. When you think about Tiger Woods back in the late '90s and in the early 2000s, when he was just dominating, there was really not a ton of competition. Like, there was not. And now, today, when you turn on golf, there's 18, 20 different kids up there that all have an opportunity to go win this week, win that weekend or win that tournament. He's made it so popular, and I think and it's obvious. It's these kids that were growing up watching and idolizing this guy who made golf cool, because golf wasn't quote-unquote cool.
It was an old guy sport.
Yes, exactly. And the coolest guy on the tour then, before Tiger, was probably John Daly. I mean, he was the most popular one. Everybody.
Chi Rodriguez, just because he used to do that stupid putter thing.
Yeah.
And then you had John Daly, who's the biggest. He could hit the ball a mile, but he's a fuck up.
Yes, exactly. And that's why people loved him, though.
He was a normal guy.
Yes.
Yep.
And he'd hit, and then he'd be smoking a fucking cigarette, walking down the fairway,
drinking a Miller Lite.
Yes, drinking a beer, and it was, and so and I think that's why people gravitated him. People gravitated to Tiger because he was just so, not only so fucking good, which regardless of the chasing Jack, for Tiger Woods is the best golfer, the best to ever have a golf club in his hand. I don't know if we'll ever see anybody who can dominate the way that he dominated.
Yeah, and here's it's good that you brought up the Michael Jordan comparison, because I'm going to go about this a different way. I'm going to go about it culturally and monetarily. Michael Jordan was probably the most influential athlete in the late 80s, early 90s, because and this is something we've talked about on the podcast, he had white kids saying, I want to be like Mike. And for that time and era, granted, it wasn't the 50s and 60s, but that was huge. Mm-hmm. He was on Wheaties boxes. He was, his shoes. Like his shoes were the coolest shoes ever, and they still are. I mean, there's people waiting in line for the new Jordans, and they're $450 a pop, something like that. But he brought more attention to not only the sport, but culturally brought a lot more people together. And yes, Michael Jordan brought not only more revenue to himself and Nike back at that time, and then once he got further along, the Jumpman logo, which is, like you said, one of the most iconic logos in the history of marketing, they marketed that together. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, his performance on the court brought more fans in the stands, bigger TV deals. Mm-hmm. Now, you fast forward that to Tiger. Like we said, it was an old man sport. Golf was a very expensive sport to play. So guess who were the golfers back then? Rich white guys. Mm-hmm. Tiger brought more eyes, more fans, more people wanting to say, I want to be like Tiger. Mm-hmm. And he was... we'd talk, he was charismatic. He was fist pumping and, making big putts and just putting his hands in the air. And he was very, very, he broke the stereotype of what a golfer should do. Mm-hmm. And he was one of the first golfers that started lifting and started taking care of his body. Now you see these dudes like Brooks Koepka to be a fucking middle linebacker somewhere. And so he revolutionized how competitive golf should be, for one. For two, he revolutionized how us, regular dudes, golf. He had the Tiger Woods logo, which I couldn't remember any other golfer having their own logo back then. That TW was on everything Nike. Nike started making clubs. Nike started making apparel. Nike started making shoes, balls, you name it. Now, of course, that's changed where they stopped They still do the clothing and the apparel, but none of the gear, so to speak. But yeah, if there was no Tiger, I think we would still see great. It would have come along as far as the physical fitness, taking care of your body.
Yeah.
But the most important thing that Tiger did to golf, tournament golf, and what all of these guys can thank Tiger, is when they win now, their pocketbook is probably 10 times as much as it was if Tiger would have never, because Tiger brought that much money. And your dad and the boys go down to one of the tournaments, right?
Yeah.
And
Memorial, Dublin, Ohio.
Yeah, and you've went
I've
with
went
them,
there,
right?
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So you've seen the gallery.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
seen how many fucking people there are. You've seen the droves that follow Tiger.
There's not one other golfer and this was at the time. This is probably 8 years ago. I mean, I had just turned 21 or maybe 22, and at the time, McIlroy was just kind of starting. He was
Right.
just kind of starting to win some
There,
tournaments.
there was no Ricky Fowler. There
no.
was no Koepka.
Ricky was playing, but he wasn't. He hadn't won anything yet. Nobody had really. He was wearing. I think the only thing that people talked about with him was he was wearing pink pants and stuff
Puma
like.
deals,
Yes, yeah. And I want to say, well, I know that Matt Kuchar is the one that won that week, and you could walk up and get within almost me to you away from him anytime you wanted at a tee box or something. You could do it. And he was the leader of the tournament. And you could do the same thing with McIlroy. You could do the same thing with any golfer that you wanted.
Except Tiger.
Tiger Woods, when the day that I was there, I think he was 7 or 8 over par. I mean, wasn't even in contention. He was going to miss the cut. He was out. And you could not get anywhere even close. And they'd start pulling the ropes, whenever he'd finish up there, and they'd pull the ropes and kind of start letting people through to get up there, get around his fairway shot or get away around his, his second shot into the green. And it was like a freaking stampede going through.
Oh, sure.
I mean, like, if you weren't watching, you were going to get ran over. And then if you fell, like, people were just going to keep stepping on you because nobody was going to stop and try to lose, like, the opportunity to see Tiger Woods' next shot into the green, which he wasn't even playing. I mean, he was playing like shit. Like, I never saw him hit one good shot. The one time I saw him, he was in a fairway bunker, and all you could see was the top of his hat because he was so deep down in the bunker that you couldn't even see him. But no, everybody just wanted to be around him, and the way that the fans and everybody just gravitated to that guy, it was unbelievable. Somebody that he was going to miss the cut and wasn't going to be there on Saturday and Sunday, but yet he was the only thing that mattered to 80% of the gallery there that day, and it was unbelievable.